Hello, Psych 101 students. Welcome to Module 7, Chapter 15, Learning Objective 8. Um, in Learning Objectives 8 and 9, we're going to answer the big question, what are the most effective treatments? In this Learning Objective 8, we will see that cognitive behavioral therapies are the best for anxiety and OCD, and we will look at multiple treatments for depressive disorders. The best practice treatments for anxiety, obsessive compulsive disorder, mood disorders, and schizophrenia are summarized in table 15.4 on page 610. I'm once again, I'm not going to go through the chart. You should look it over yourself, but we will be talking about some of this during this and the next learning objective. Okay, cognitive behavioral therapy works best to treat nearly all disorders that include anxious thoughts. A key part of behavior therapies for anxiety disorders is what's called an exposure component. Exposure is a therapy technique that involves repeatedly exposing a client to an anxiety producing stimulus or situation and has the goal of reducing the client's fear. So a quick example is, let's say that somebody has a specific phobia where they fear going on an elevator, and so they always take the stairs, and it's disruptive in their life to never be able to walk onto an elevator. So perhaps they seek treatment for it. If exposure therapy was used, I mean the simplest form of exposure therapy would be to get this person onto an elevator and have them stay in it while it goes up and down in a building without giving them an opportunity to leave the the elevator. Now, I'm not saying you're holding them against their will, but you make these agreements beforehand. The therapist would go along with the client and help them feel relaxed. But if you leave, if somebody is really fearful of elevators, when they first get on and it starts to go, they're going to be terrified and anxious. But as time goes on, let's say you do this for 1 hour, you keep them on there for 1 hour. After a while, that you can't keep the anxiety up because it's going to just get boring. Like nothing's happening. You're going up and down, and you would use an elevator where no one else is getting on, and the doors don't even open. It just kind of keeps going, and and the person like would lose their anxiety over time because they were dreadfully afraid. But now it's like, well, they've been going up and down for a while, and it's actually boredom would probably start to set in, and the anxiety would disappear. And in a 1 hour treatment like that, it's possible to actually to cure a specific phobia by directly exposing them to what they're afraid of. And this would this exposure therapy would just convince the person that elevators aren't so bad or scary. They would lose the fear just from constant exposure to it. Okay, that's one example. Uh, anti-anxiety drugs are also beneficial in some cases because they have a sedative effect that makes people calmer, at least in the short term. But they do little to lessen the source of anxiety, and they are addictive. By contrast, the effects of cognitive behavioral therapy persist long after treatment, and so this remains the best treatment in general for anxiety disorders. Here's a example of exposure being used. Once again, it's a common feature of many cognitive behavioral therapies. In this sequence shown here, exposure helps a girl overcome her fear of dogs. a type of specific phobia. She's not allowed to avoid the dog, and her level of exposure to the dog is gradually increased. So you see, in the first picture, the girl in the white shirt on the left has a phobia about dogs. So, I mean, she is there, with presumably let's say her mother, and they would start by, just standing as they're doing there, a number of feet away from the dog, and then eventually, like after some time, she would be, encouraged to approach the dog, and once again, in a very supportive atmosphere, and they would have a very calm dog there, and if you can, you get the kid to come forward and start petting the dog, and from, as it says, from this mild form of exposure, she learns that the dog is not dangerous, and she overcomes her fear. And I mean, it's not magic, like, but it's not always going to work with like a 5 minute exposure or something. But if you did this for a while, and it can actually work in one session. So this whole sequence, they would probably, once again, they might do this for an hour, have her exposed to a total of 1 hour to the dog, and just like I talked about with the elevator. I mean, the fear initially, it would be very strong when she starts a session, and it would just start to decrease and decrease and decrease. And the reason this doesn't just naturally happen is when you're afraid of something, you never end up being exposed to it because you constantly avoid it. So that person that was afraid of elevators, like, he wouldn't learn on his own because he never takes an elevator. And this person would never approach a dog, this child, on their own. So, like, the therapy just helps to bring you in contact with your feared object, and that's what exposure really is. And it it does work. um, okay. I mean, there are certain, in severe cases, I mean, it's not always going to work in one session. I don't want you to think that. I mean, at times it might be very gradual over time, but it is a part of most cognitive behavioral therapies. Okay, so that was, we just looked at exposure with a specific phobia, a fear of dogs. So learning theory suggests that specific phobias are acquired either by experiencing a trauma or by observing similar fear in others. Behavior techniques are the treatment of choice, along with approaches to changing the client's thoughts about the fearful stimulus. The earliest behavior technique was known as systematic desensitization, and this was developed by Joseph Wolpe, 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 Joseph Wolpe. In 1958, he created systematic desensitization, and this was to help with specific phobias. Um, Systematic desensitization gradually exposes clients to anxiety-producing situations through the use of imagined scenes. You first teach the client relaxation techniques, um, because if the client is relaxed while thinking about their feared situation, then they can't be anxious at the same time. I mean, relaxed and anxious don't go together. So you're teaching them a different response. Um, you teach them how to be relaxed, and we're going to look at an example of a fear hierarchy. You do baby steps, and where it's not like the exposure therapy of putting somebody on an elevator. I mean, it's this is all just starting with imagination. And so, I mean, a client creates a fear hierarchy. This is an example here, also known as an anxiety hierarchy. And you can see the degree of fear. It ranges from the easiest up to the most frightening scenes, and the therapist is going to work to have the client imagine um, each of these steps, but they don't move on to the next one until they can, imagine one of these and feel completely relaxed. So you teach them relaxation. You start at the top. Now, I want you to imagine standing on the balcony of the top floor of an apartment tower. And if they start feeling fear, then you remind them of the relaxation training. You work with them, and you, as long as it takes, you'll work with them to overcome this first step until the point that they can imagine standing on the top floor of an apartment tower and actually still feel relaxed. And then you move on to number two. So, sitting on the slope of a mountain, looking out over the horizon. So you don't move on to the next step until they can imagine the previous step and still feel completely relaxed. And so it's the way I think of this is it's a series of baby steps. I mean, you never just throwing them into an elevator like in some exposure therapies, or even that scene with the dog was a quicker solution than this. This is meant to be um, a gradual procedure that would typically be done over a number of sessions, and so there's no sudden frightening moment for the person. It's fairly easy to go through this kind of treatment. It can also occur in vivo. That's the word in and then space VIVO. That means in real life. So in vivo means in real life. So if it's possible, you might do a series of fearful situations that you actually expose them to, like rather than just having them imagine it. This one would be hard. If you read these things on this list, you're not going to do all of these in real life. But if somebody had a fear of snakes and wanted to get rid of it, like you might start by just showing them pictures of snakes and teaching, and that might be the first step where they have to relax when they look at picture. And then you would have a snake that's completely glassed in a cage, and they would have to be able to look at it without being afraid. And then eventually you would have to take the snake out of the cage, and anyway, but it would be gradual steps, and by the end of the series of steps, I mean, you can reach a point where that you actually have the snake on, like, around the person's neck, kind of, like you can reach a point where you had a big snake draped over the person. Like, it really works. Like, a person can completely overcome something that they used to be terrified, because they go through this in such little baby steps, um and it once again, it really does work. Okay, let's go on here. A recent alternative is to expose clients to fearful situations without putting them in danger by using computers to stimulate the environments and the feared objects. So computer-generated images can simulate feared environments or social interactions. For example, in this virtual world, you see in the picture there, the guy's got the special virtual reality glasses on, and you could have the client standing on the edge of a tall building or flying in an aircraft, um, for instance, and just you're simulating it in a safe environment. And you would get them to practice relaxation as they go through their steps using virtual reality in order to get rid of their fear. By using a process of systematic desensitization, the client can conquer the virtual situation before taking on the feared situation in real life, which would be the next step, to actually, face something in real life. Okay, psychotropic medication treatments for phobias often include anti-anxiety drugs that are common, but they don't fix the problem. They, help you feel more relaxed about it. But and so cognitive behavioral therapies are the treatments of choice for phobias. However, antidepressants may be useful for social phobia in particular, or what's also known as social anxiety disorder. Okay. Panic disorder has multiple components, and each symptom may require a different treatment. When people feel anxious, they tend to overestimate the probability of danger, which contributes to their rising feelings of panic. When I used to have my occasional panic attacks while driving, I always thought that I was going to have a heart attack or pass out, which would just, and those thoughts would just make my symptoms worse. You just contribute to your own anxiety. So cognitive restructuring tries to change your mental interpretation of your symptoms so you don't have those worst case scenario thoughts that just feed the panic. For instance, a therapist might point out that in all of, let's say they were talking to me, in all of your past attacks, you've never actually had a heart attack or you've never actually passed out. And that is extremely unlikely to ever occur, which is the truth. It just feels like it's going to occur. So, so just kind of in pointing out that rationally, these are not rational thoughts to have, even though it feels like it. Like you you try to get the person thinking differently, like so that they don't feed their own panic when they start to have an attack. Um, then the therapist can also use exposure by creating symptoms of a panic attack, and they do this in treatment. Like they can get your heart racing just like it would during a panic attack. They can simulate hyperventilation like happens during a panic attack, and shortness of breath. There are ways that they can simulate these feelings in you so that you become familiar with them. You can become familiar with the symptoms, and you can experience that they don't lead to further doom and gloom like you always thought. That you can have a racing heart or be short of breath and still be okay. That and so like it's through. So this is using cognitive restructuring to get you to think differently about what's going to happen during what will happen during a panic attack, so you don't increase the panic, and it gets you used to the symptoms so that they're not going to be as scary or fearful when they occur. Cognitive behavioral therapy is as effective or more effective than medication in the short term, and cognitive behavior therapy has longer lasting effects in the long term. So once again, cognitive behavioral therapy is the preferred treatment of choice for treating panic disorder. Obsessive compulsive disorders is also treated by a cognitive therapy technique known as exposure and response prevention. So, for example, looking at this example listed here, shown in the picture. So, suppose someone who obsesses about germs, well, they might engage in a compulsive behavior, as you know, such as excessive hand washing. That's very common. Obsessive and obsession and compulsion pairing. Um, in exposure and response prevention therapy, the client is asked to touch something dirty that would normally cause them to immediately go wash. So they get them to touch something dirty, but then they're prevented from immediately washing, their hands. This is intended to break the link between the obsession and the compulsion. And if you can do that, it reduces both actually. Because they are linked. This is why it's obsessive compulsive disorder. They're linked together. If you break that link, it actually it'll start to decrease the obsessions as well as the compulsions. And it may only require a single session to be effective. Just like, more extreme exposure therapies can be done in one session. As I mentioned earlier, this also can be done in one session. at least in some cases. And this is the thing. I mean, like the person always does the combination. It's always a routine. They get if they know that they touch something dirty, it bothers them. They always go wash and and you just have to kind of break that cycle and break that link. Okay. Research shows that exposure and response prevention proved superior to the use of a specific tricyclic antidepressant, and both were better than placebos. You can see this in the graph over here. This is, number of symptoms the person has. So this green line, it shows, somewhat of a reduction of symptoms when the person's on a tricyclic antidepressant. But the orange line, goes much lower. So this is like showing a reduction of symptoms, like lower is better on the graph. And so you can see it's doing way better than the drug therapy at reducing symptoms. And the final, the red one is doing both together. It gives you, it's not much better than just doing exposure and response prevention, but they can be done in combination. And they're all better than placebos, which is the control condition, which is shown at the top. Anyway, so the evidence shows that this exposure and response prevention is really does reduce symptoms for OCD. So cognitive behavioral therapy may be more effective at treating obsessive compulsive disorder than medication, especially over the long term. Deep brain stimulation may be an effective treatment for people with obsessive compulsive disorder who do not respond to cognitive behavioral therapy or to medications. So it offers new hope as an alternative treatment. Remember, deep brain stimulation is, having those electrodes implanted in your brain that stimulate a brain area. Okay. In the 2020 documentary, Justin Bieber, Next Chapter, the singer opens up about his experience with depression and suicidal thoughts. Bieber took time off from touring and producing music to seek treatment. Once again, just another example of a famous person opening up about their mental disorder. Many effective treatments are available for depression, including psychotropic medications. The most common psychotropic medications used to treat depression are SSRIs, or selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, is what it stands for. But most people know the term SSRIs, and this refers to, the most popular antidepressants out there, like Prozac, Zoloft, Paxil, Lexapro, Celexa, for instance. These are all SSRIs, and they are certainly the most used antidepressants. Since selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors have the fewest serious side effects, they tend to be used as the first-line medication. The use of antidepressants is based on the belief that depression is caused by an imbalance in neurotransmitters or problems with neural receptors in the brain. Approximately 60 to 70% experience relief taking antidepressants, compared to about 30% who respond to placebos. So antidepressants certainly do outperform placebos, which is always an important thing to show in any study. That's not just, that the pill is actually doing something. It's not just the idea that you're going to get better making you better, which is what the placebo does. So 30% improve taking placebos, but 60 to 70% taking the actual pill is a significant increase from that. Research has shown that cognitive behavioral therapy is just as effective as antidepressants at treating depression. The CBT approach helps the client think more adaptively and eliminate the cognitive triad of negative thoughts. Remember the cognitive triad from Aaron Beck? It's when people perceive themselves, their situations, and the future negatively. CBT can be effective on its own, but combining it with antidepressant medication may be more effective than either approach alone. Clients in cognitive behavioral therapy may be asked to keep a record of events and their reactions to those events, including the automatic thoughts that they had. Uh, this log can help identify patterns in thinking and behaviors. This is an example shown here from created by a person suffering from depression, and it's an example of cognitive restructuring. It's so you've got the events and the dates listed on the left, and then they how the event made them feel, and most importantly, they have to pay attention to what their thinking was, when the event happened. So my friend forgot my birthday. Oh, what have I done now? Is the thinking. Maybe she no longer wants to be my friend. And then the client is tries to come up with alternative ways of thinking of the situation, and this is what the therapist helps them with. So, is it likely she was just busy or distracted, or we're likely still friends and can get together later and have some fun? And these are these negative thought patterns are one of the reasons depression uh, is so prevalent is that a lot of people do carry these kind of negative thinking patterns around. And so when some kind of negative event happens, like you're failing a test, and so you're thinking that you're not intelligent, or I don't know, a manager came to check on a report that's overdue, and so you automatically think that you're going to get fired or something like. Um, these negative thought patterns start a downward spiral that eventually lead to depression. And if you can replace them, which is what cognitive restructuring is all about, then you're going to be able to function much more adaptively, and you're going to avoid those negative feelings. There's also alternative treatments for depression, such as phototherapy. Phototherapy is one treatment for seasonal affective disorder, or SAD. What a great acronym. SAD. Okay, it's a depressive disorder with a seasonal pattern. People tend to get depressed during the winter months, when there is less sun available. Um, while receiving phototherapy, the client sits in front of a light, strong light for several hours each day to reduce symptoms of depression. And it's a very specialized light, apparently very expensive, is what I've heard, but because it simulates sunlight, and so it has to be very bright, and it has to be a certain type of light. So you can't just get like 100-watt bulbs and regular lights and whatnot. It is a specialized type of light, and but you can, as shown here, you can sit and read, and you just need to have the light on you. It probably takes getting some used to, but apparently for many people it is very effective at reducing their depression during during the winter months when there's less natural sunlight available. Some more alternative treatments. Um, Treatment that alters the brain's electrical function, such as electroconvulsive therapy, may be effective for some people who are severely depressed and who do not respond to conventional treatments. Remember, ECT is when you shock the brain, causing a seizure. Um, a series of studies has demonstrated that changing brain function by using transcranial magnetic stimulation over the left frontal regions of the brain also reduces depression significantly. Remember, TMS uses magnetic pulses to disable a part of the brain. And then we have deep brain stimulation, and that may be valuable for treating severe depression when all other treatments have failed. That's even more severe because it requires surgery to have an electrode implanted into your brain. Several studies have been done using DBS for treatment-resistant depression, and each time at least half the clients benefited from the treatment. And once again, they are called treatment-resistant because they have tried medications, they have tried therapy, they've tried other alternative treatments, and so like eventually, if you can't find anything else to solve an issue, then a person may agree to undergo surgery to if it's going to cure their depression, because it's a horrible way to live. Um, Here's an example of showing deep brain stimulation. This is Sean Mayberg's study of deep brain stimulation for depression. The hypothesis was that deep brain stimulation of an area of the prefrontal cortex may alleviate depression. So what they did was they drilled a pair of small holes into the skulls of 6 participants. And you can see here in this picture on the right that an electrode gets implanted in the brain. A pulse generator gets attached underneath the collarbone, and it connects to electrodes that are passed through the holes in the skull to a specific area of the prefrontal cortex. Results: some participants reported relief as soon as the electrodes were switched on, and 2/3 of the participants felt significantly better within months. Remember, in this particular study, there were only 6 participants, so 2/3 of them felt better. So 4 out of 6, which is a good percentage, felt better, significantly better within months. So the conclusion is that deep brain stimulation may be an especially effective method for clients with depression that is resistant to other treatments. I mean, 4 out of 6 is a great number, considering that all these clients have tried, all the regular treatments, and they haven't worked. Initial studies like this one have shown very promising results, but research is still ongoing. And that will conclude learning objective 8.